There are rumors abound that Vince McMahon is going to sell the WWE, but there are also reports stating that they're nothing but just that, rumors. However, with that being said, the question still remains, should he? Now, from Vince McMahon's own personal mindset, I can't answer that question because I don't know him, and I'm pretty sure that you don't either. However, from a business mindset, that's a different story, because we actually do have concrete evidence and real solid numbers that can give us a better idea as to whether or not this is a good business decision. And that's exactly what the topic of this episode is, because today, a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters like Baba Yaga and Caleb Robinson. Thank you all so much. Before we get into the video, allow me to remind you to please give this video a big thumbs up and to make sure that your notifications are working. And also, if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so, as it really does help out the channel, and I really do appreciate it. First, allow me to state that I am not a financial expert at all, not even a little, and that Vince McMahon, I'm sure, has plenty of big money gurus to help him out making all kinds of business decisions, and that he definitely doesn't need my input on the situation. And also allow me to state yet again, I don't know Vince McMahon at all, and I'm pretty sure you don't either. So any assertions claiming to know what Vince McMahon is thinking is definitely not relevant here. And above all else, I also want to state, when it comes to the question of whether or not Vince is going to sell the WWE, I don't know. And if you came here thinking that I really did, well, I'm sorry. However, with that being said, I would still like to play a little bit of amateur Wolf of Wall Street and use the limited information that I have at my disposal to formulate my own novice conclusion on this subject that I will be sharing with you in order for us to speculate on it together. Now yes, we are going to be making a few assumptions here, but they will be based off of logic and common business sense rather than making presumptions on the personality type of someone that we don't really know. And we will try to keep these assumptions at a minimum nevertheless. So, now that we got that out the way, should Vince McMahon sell WWE? Well, let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's start with the obvious question here. How much is WWE worth? Well, that can be a tricky question, since it will probably change at least 10 times from me writing this to this episode actually making air. So let's just ballpark it and say the company is worth about $5 billion, which is usually where it hovers around. Now, this might change at any moment for more or less, but it's a reasonable approximation for the purposes of this video. With that being said, if Vince McMahon were to sell his real favorite child, that means he would be doing it for a cool 5B, right? Well, maybe. Because when you flip something, the whole point is to make profit off of it, or else why bother? It doesn't make sense to get rid of something that generates revenue without making some in the process, because once he sells it, that revenue won't be his anymore. And I know what some of you might be thinking. Didn't WCW sell for only $2.5 million, and isn't that less than what the company was worth? Well, yes, from my understanding. But don't forget that the tape library was not included with this number, and that was an additional $1.7 million on top. Although, admittedly, even with that, it's still a surprisingly low number. But allegedly, there is a reason behind this. As part of the condition for Time Warner Media merging with America Online, AOL didn't want WCW as part of the deal, so Time Warner were looking to unload WCW quickly. Now, there is definitely a lot more to the story, but let's remember that this is not the focal point of this video, and it's just an example meant to illustrate a point. Anyway, back to the lecture at hand. As far as I know, WWE is not subject to a pending merger with another company. Also, remember, WWE isn't an adjunct like WCW was to Time Warner. WWE is the company. So why would someone want to merge with WWE except for the whole WWE part? Based off of the evidence I have, I can't think of any reason why Vince McMahon would want to sell WWE at a loss. However, with that being said, who's to say that $5 billion is necessarily a loss after all? Reportedly, Vince McMahon himself brought home $3.9 million last year, but remember, WWE is a family affair. Stephanie took home $2.2 million, Triple H made $2.38 million, and Shane, the boy wonder, apparently makes the least at just over $955K, which, you know, is mere pittance. And if you're wondering about Linda, remember she quit WWE for her political aspirations. Now, when we total all that up, it gets us to right under $9.5 $2.5 million. But that's just what they make annually. This isn't including everything that they already have, nor does it cover what they will bring in the future. So, while we answered what WWE is worth, maybe we should be asking about the McMahons themselves. Because after looking at his annual revenue, it has been reported that Vince McMahon is worth $2.1 billion, at least as of last I checked. Stephanie and Triple H are both worth $150 million, and Shane is at $100 million. Bringing the McMahons to $2.5 billion total worth. And when you look at it that way, the McMahons could keep bringing home about $10 million collectively every year while being worth $2.5 billion, or they could just get $5 billion right now and call it a day, which is double what the family is worth. And this is how things get complicated. WWE should sell for over $5 billion to profit, but for the individual McMahons, over $2.5 billion is more than they're worth. It would be like if you found a rare artifact that is worth $1 million, but you don't know anyone who wants to buy it and has $1 million to spare. Instead, all you can get is some guy willing to offer you $100,000, and currently you work at the dollar store. So even though you're selling the item at a major loss, it's still a tremendous gain to you because holding onto the artifact really doesn't do anything for you. Thus, the question now becomes, do you sell WWE for what it's worth, or do you sell it for what the McMahons are? And ultimately, Vince McMahon has to make the decision on whether or not WWE has a greater value to him right now as it is, or could it have more value down the line in the future. But when it comes to answering that question, again, we're not going to presume on the thoughts of people we don't know. However, in terms of having a greater value by holding on to it, well, when we think about that, I should point out just a few things first. Now, the stock market is a very complicated thing, so I'm just going to give you a very stripped down explanation for the purposes of this video. In short, a company's fair economic value is determined by the business valuation process. It's an estimate on what a company is worth, which can fluctuate up or down for any variety of reasons. New partnerships, new products, scandals can all affect the perceived worth of a company on a moment's notice. And the funny thing is, its perceived estimated worth can sometimes influence how much people actually think a company is worth for real. For example, signing a big money deal can make a company look more valuable, like the $265 million a year that WWE gets from the USA Network for Raw and NXT, and not to mention the $205 million that they get every year from Fox for SmackDown. This makes WWE look very impressive, and when these deals started taking place in 2018, WWE stock soared because of how the company's public profile made them appear to be more valuable. However, while WWE stock was at an all-time high back in 2018, WWE is currently a bit far away from what it used to be worth. So, if WWE was to sell for its highest value, well, that ship has sailed a long time ago. However, while we're talking about Fox, there is another side to this whole estimated worth thing that we have to consider, and it's that sometimes these estimations are just flat out wrong. When Fox's assets were set up for sale, Disney made an initial bid of $52 billion. Comcast responded with an even higher offer, which led to Disney countering that offer with another offer of $71.3 billion. So, what value a company has sometimes just depends on how much people are willing to spend on it, how much they think it's worth. And also, while we're on the subject of different companies, Disney, Fox, NBC Universal, these are some of the companies that people have presented as the most likely suspects as to who would buy WWE if it were up for sale. However, we should probably examine the likelihood of each of these one by one. For starters, there were rumors that the House of Mouse was interested in the House of McMahon, but Disney had a pretty hard year like the rest of us. Not only had they just dropped $71 billion a couple of years ago for Fox, but a major portion of their revenue comes from things like movies and their theme parks, which were not things that were available for most people throughout most of the year. And yes, their movies were on Disney+, but that's not going to bring in any kind of the money that movie tickets do. Plus, when it comes to their movies, a lot of them were already made, and a lot of money was already tied up in production. Money that they couldn't get back the way they were expecting to. So Disney right now doesn't exactly have the same amount of scratch lying around that they normally would, meaning that they're really not in the best position to buy WWE. But what about Fox then? They have that $71 billion that Disney gave them, and they already have SmackDown. So wouldn't this be a natural fit? Well, unfortunately for them, Fox spent $1 billion to put SmackDown in their Friday night time slot, even though the show couldn't break 3 million on the USA Network. Meanwhile, the previous tenant of that time slot was the sitcom Last Man Standing, which premiered just a season prior to over 8 million total people watching. And currently, SmackDown struggles to break 2 million viewers, so it doesn't seem logical for Fox to view more WWE as a solution to, well, anything. And also, let's not forget that WWE recently gave up the network to NBC Universal, one of Fox's competitors, which is also something of a conflict of interest. And as for NBC Universal, if they were going to buy WWE, wouldn't they have just done it flat out? Why would they spend $1 billion for the WWE streaming rights, then spend another $5 billion a year or so later, especially considering that if they bought the entire thing outright for $5 billion in the first place, they would have gotten the network along with it. Furthermore, let's also note that the WWE network only averaged around 1.5 million subscribers, and at $9.99 a month, that translates to roughly 180 million a year, which is actually less than the 200 million a year that NBC paid for it. Plus, that's not even taking into account that the Peacock has a $5 monthly option. But when it all boils down, any one or all of these factors might be completely meaningless. Vince might end up selling to a completely different party that we didn't even think about. There also might be top flight information that only top executives have access to. Or Vince McMahon might even just give the company away to the fans and we can all make decisions as a whole. Alright, I doubt it, but I'm just saying. However, I also have to say, it's not like Vince McMahon doesn't defy all business common sense and logic on a regular basis, because he definitely does. Think about it. Despite everything I said about Fox and Universal, they still went ahead and made those deals anyway, even though they don't seem to make the most practical sense. Vince McMahon has continuously and routinely gotten more money out of WWE than anyone would ever think possible. However, that might just be all the more reason why the company has greater value in his hands than anyone else's. So, is Vince McMahon going to sell WWE? Who knows, because as they say, anything can happen in WWE. Well, there you go, my thoughts on if Vince McMahon should sell WWE, but what are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you're subscribed to this channel and that you give this video a big thumbs up, and also if you want to continue supporting the channel, please go over and visit my Patreon page. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.